The most anticipated season in the history of college football. Is it? What makes a contender? And Pete goes fishing. This is the College GameDay Podcast for the final day of July, the 31st. Rece Davis and Pete Thamel with you. Pete's been everywhere. Pete, we're going to start today by breaking down our contenders or long shots in terms of a season preview. With the new 12-team playoff, we've grouped these teams loosely, at least to start, in a group of 12. Familiarizing people with how the playoff's going to work. We'll do at the end the 12 teams that we believe will make the playoff, the 12 teams that are close. And today we're going to start with 12 teams that, in my judgment, need exactly the right bolt of lightning to hit at exactly the right moment to somehow sneak into the playoff. We will get to that. But first of all, let's start with your exploits. You have now become an expert fisherman, courtesy of Notre Dame quarterback Riley Leonard, and that still sounds odd to say.
Yes, I don't know how much we're supposed to give away of our game day secrets, Rece, but I have. We got a good feat. What was that?
You can tease.
We'll tease. Yeah, we have a great Notre Dame feature week one, where I went fishing with Notre Dame star quarterback Riley Leonard. A tremendous young man who was unusually patient with my pedestrian fishing skills, and we're out on a boat, actually in Michigan, just over the Indiana-Michigan line, about 30 miles away, and we cast some rods and we caught some fish, man. We caught. Did some
you
fish.
Really?
Yes. The most memorable quote, which I don't know if it'll make the story or not, because certainly the story is not about me. Was when I reeled the fish in. Riley looks up and goes, "Oh, actually, I'm surprised."
Because it can be a little about you. I'm going to go inside baseball and behind the curtain for just a second, because there are many inside running jokes in College Game Day as we are putting the show together and arguing about things. And for years and years and years, when someone doesn't like someone else's idea, they'll often say, or if they just don't think it's the best thing for the show, it might not be personal, hopefully. They'll say, it's not about me unless it was my idea, or something like that. The show's not about me unless it's my idea. And one of our executives, who shall remain nameless, once said, not affiliated with Game Day, he's on the outside, is affiliated with college football. And he said, when you guys say that, get all self-righteous and say the show's not about me, he said, the whole show is about you guys. He said, I mean, it's not, and he didn't mean it like that, like it's not self-aggrandizing, but the thing is that we immerse ourselves in the sport. So if a little bit of it is Pete Thamel's fishing skills, that's okay. That's okay. It shows personality.
Really, lack of would be what was showcased.
Before we break into these groups of 12 and how we view them as contenders, you brought up an interesting point. It's actually one that our friends Danny Cannell and Dusty Dvorak brought up recently as well. In your judgment, is this the most anticipated college football season ever?
So I have a hard time saying ever, because I don't know about that. Like the 1954 season, like Army was great, Notre Dame was great, or whatever. But in my 21 years doing this and in my time on Earth, I cannot remember a season with more anticipation, Rece. And I think it's like a confluence of collisions, right? We have these two now super leagues basically that have added USC, Oregon, Washington, UCLA in the Big Ten, and then obviously Oklahoma and Texas as part of the SEC. It just supercharges those leagues, and there's a fundamental curiosity of how that's going to go. I mean, look at week one, just the games that are going to be on ESPN ABC, the triple header to start. Clemson at Georgia, Miami at Florida, Notre Dame at A&M. I mean, that remember what week one used to be? Used to be Penn State's going to beat, directional Michigan by 62. It used to be that. Look at what we're going to intro the sport. Never mind week 0 with Game Day in Ireland, in Florida State, coming off the ACC championship, playing it in a very good Georgia Tech team, by the way. I was tempted to put Georgia Tech in my outside contenders. I think I'm going to regret not to. They got 5-0 linemen, but I really like Georgia Tech. But so I think the playoff going to 12 is going to bring a lot in. And I think we're going to explore today a little bit what is a contender? Like, this is one of the interesting things about this season. Like, if you're ranked 24th on October 20th, you're a contender, right? Like, you're like, especially if you're in one of the two power leagues, but even if you're in the Big 12 and the AC, like, you have a chance to go. And I think that's going to electrify the country. For a lot of years, like, you lose in September in college football and you're relevant regionally still, but not nationally. And I think we're going to have, until November 1st, 30 programs locked in with a chance. It's like the NFL. You got a shot at the wild card. You know, you got a shot, things go your way and you go 7-9, you can get the wild card. And so I really think all the new matchups, the new playoff coming in, the leagues changing, and the paradigm of the sport just completely shifting. I really believe it's the most anticipated year. And I do think this, I met up with a friend last night who pointed this out. Like, I think the game has really been a great kickstart. And I'm not just saying this because you spent hundreds of hours voicing it. I just think the old EA Sports game really brought in a generation of fans to college football. I remember talking to people who go, "Oh, Oregon, yeah." They're not like, "Oh, Marcus Mariota, oh, that time they went to the Coliseum and hung 63 on lane." No, they say, "Oh yeah, they were awesome in the game." Like, that's their introduction. And now with the actual players in the game, it's a star maker. So, like, people under 25, who I'm just going to stereotype as a majority of the people playing the game, they're going to have 3 months of Quinn Ewers on the sticks, or whatever it is, 2.5 months of Quinn Ewers on the sticks before Quinn Ewers throws a pass. So I really think, like, that is such a magnetic star maker, or kinetic. It's such a kinetic thing where, like, people are going to anticipate the game, play the game. I think that is going to, a little bit like fantasy football in the NFL, like, change the paradigm. I really think the game is going to be, I don't want to overstate it, but I do think it's going to ratchet up interest in college football because you now have engagement constantly, not just on Saturdays.
One of the Ohio State players, I don't remember if it was Quinshon Judkins or someone else. It really doesn't matter, but he told a reporter that his whole deal was, not that he's trying to get practice or workouts over with, but that once he got finished with his football work of the day, his whole goal was to get back and play the game. Or to get back and play the game. Yeah. And a lot of guys are doing that. And in terms of anticipation, it's like Christmas, because you don't know what's inside the box most of the time if you do Christmas properly anyway.
Great analogy.
And yeah, you don't know what's in there. And you cannot wait for that moment of euphoria when you tear open the wrapping paper. But sometimes you open it up and yeah, you're like the old man in a Christmas store. Oh, bowling ball. It's a bowling ball, and you're not as thrilled. But I do think that anticipation is what's fueling it. And I will echo what I've said from the beginning. While I am in favor of the 12-team playoff, the thing I'm most excited about, home playoff games. That's going to be spectacular. It's awesome. It's also going to drive the expansion to 16 at some point, because those top 4 teams right now in this format that aren't getting home playoff games, it's not going to take many years to say, wait a minute, we want that too. And that's going to drive the expansion to 16.
Conference championship games are going to cycle out, even though they're unbelievably valuable. Like, they're going to cycle out because somebody's going to say, we're not playing our starters.
Well, maybe, and that's what it would take, but there's so much money in those right now.
No, I agree. I agree that the networks do not want to lose those games. Those are, if even like that terrible Michigan-Iowa game, and I mean terrible because it was lopsided, it was one of the highest rated games, it has been, because didn't they play twice in the Big Ten game? Michigan and Iowa?
Yeah.
Yes. Like, those games,
they played Purdue they played Purdue one year, maybe they played Iowa the year before.
But even like a bad game in those does a monster number. Mm-hmm. And it's not like people like woke up that day thinking Iowa had a chance, know?
21 and 23, Michigan and Iowa played in the Big Ten title game, and the combined score was 68-3. So your point's well taken. The thing is, Pete, for the good of the competition and just how you would structure it, I think it would be more inviting to the fans to make that weekend a first round on campus playoff weekend, because you're still in the season. But I think that's really far down the road because of television, and because right now these will function as another level of pseudo playoff. In many cases, this will be like a double elimination tournament. You'll be playing for the bye, you'll be playing for a contention for the bye, or you'll be playing for, pardon me, home field. And maybe in some cases there will be a loser leave town situation. But I do think that we will be, over the course of this excitement and the fact that these teams that we're about to talk about, even if they lose 2 or 3 games, because they'll still be in their conference race potentially, there will be excitement surrounding that. But we are giving up the gigantic regular season game. Take Texas and Georgia, Texas hosting Georgia, for instance, later on this season. That is going to be an enormous game. It's going to feel like, just a huge Super Bowl type feel. There's an F1 race in Austin that weekend. It's going to be huge. But at the end of the day, it might be the first of 3. It might be the first of 2. They might rematch again. And even if they don't, the loser is highly likely to still be in the playoff and have an opportunity to get through. So you're sacrificing a little for the anticipation of the unknown. And I do think that, that newness that comes with unwrapping the gift on Christmas morning is pretty special. Let's dive into some of these teams. What we're doing here, again, to reiterate, is we're grouping teams in 12 as opposed to the traditional conference previews, because by definition, when we get to the 12 teams that each of us will be predicting to make the playoff, we will be predicting your conference champion there because they get automatic playoff bids. So what we're talking about now, teams that either could be in that contention spot for a playoff berth by winning their conference, or maybe if things hit just right, they might work their way into an at-large bid. But these are the longer shots. These are the tougher ones. As we start this, Pete, how do you define now a contender in this playoff era? What's your precise definition of contention? Is it just contending for your conference championship no matter what?
Yeah, and I just think the interesting thing, and again, this is part of the gift that we don't know what's in and we don't know what's unwrapped, is like, when do you stop being a contender when you don't really have any knowledge of how the playoff is going to unfold? And I think too, the league's growing the way they are. We have no idea how the committee is going to judge these teams, right? This many lost SEC team versus this many lost Big 12. So I feel like until November 1st, and I'm just absolutely making this up off the top of my head, there will be 30 teams you could say that are in contention. Do you think that's a fair number on November 1st? I'm just saying 8 games played about at that point.
I do. And the reason I'll give you that is, one, look at Boise State last year. Yeah. Now, Boise State probably lost a couple of extra games and didn't have much of a chance to be the highest ranked Group of 5 champion.
They had a really bad early loss last year.
Right. They got smoked by Washington. They lost a close game to UCF. But at any rate, they play 8 games in to draw the line that you just drew. They're 4-4. Coach fired, interim coach. Well, they win their last 3 regular season games. The other things around them in the Mountain West fell right for them to get into the conference championship game, which they won. When they did that, even if they didn't make that last playoff spot, you are in contention for it, because something similar might happen in another league, that lets you have the opportunity to be the highest ranked Group of 5 champion. So that's the type of thing I think that changes the definition of contention in college football for this season. So I think 30 is the right number, and there will probably be, we're going to say 36. So I'll say there'll be 36 teams that at least have a prayer at Jordan-Hare type of shot at getting into the playoff mix at the end.
Yeah, I think that's a fair number. And look, in the SEC or the Big Ten, if you go beat 3 ranked teams in November, you can reassert yourself in that conversation pretty quickly, because you could play 3 top 15 teams in that span. So I do think and then how much you're rewarded for that versus maybe some early losses. I really think the pressure on the committee in this iteration, Rece, is exponentially more than the last iteration. Would you agree with that?
No, because I think the pressure on the committee will never be greater than leaving out an undefeated Florida State team, or of moving Ohio State, from 6-4 past two teams, who had been dominant for much of the season. And, one of them finished, I think TCU finished that year with like a 52-3 win or something. Yeah. And then, ended up getting passed by Ohio State. But there is some pressure. But a lot of it, Pete, I think will be alleviated by the math, because splitting hairs between 4 and 5 is way different than splitting hairs between 11 and 12, because the 11th and 12th ranked teams have at least given you a reason. It's like it's kind of like with umpires. If you've got a bad umpire behind the plate, got to be more aggressive in the early part of the count, because if you leave it in his hands, you're probably, you got a chance of getting back. So same with the referees. Don't leave it in the referee's hands. Say like in basketball, you can't leave, go finish the play at the rim, because if you leave it in the official's hands, he might hose you, or he might just make a judgment that you don't agree with. It doesn't necessarily have to be a hosing.
Let me say this about pressure I think the pressure is this. It's a different pressure. I think the pressure is telling people that 3-loss team is better than a 2-loss team. Like, there's going to be some, like, you're going to make like cast judgments on this league is so much better, Big Ten or SEC, than this league, ACC or Big 12, that your extra wins don't mean as much, like that their losses mean more. And I think in a lot of ways, they're really going to define the power construct and how this all works. Because ultimately, leagues are going to be judged on what? How many teams get in the playoff, right? It's going to be all the nonsense, and all the variables are going to be distilled to that. And so when you get those last couple spots, and you have a 2-loss Big 12 team that like lost to a good team in the regular season, the conference title game, and then you have like a 3, maybe could we have a 4-loss team in the playoff from a power league? Probably not, right?
It'd have to be a really unique set of circumstances.
Yes, but there's going to be unique set. Look at Florida State. We're talking about unique sets of circumstances, right?
Yeah, but a 4-loss set of circumstances, then with the way these schedules are constructed, because you're almost by definition 4-loss teams talking SEC or Big Ten, right?
Yeah, sure.
And no one else is going to have that chance.
Yeah.
If you get to a 4-loss situation, one of two things almost certainly has happened. You haven't beaten a contender, or you have a bad loss. Yeah. Both of which I think, even in a 12-team field, is probably grounds for elimination.
Yeah, so, I agree. But I do think there's just going to be some really interesting scenarios, and those decisions are really going to define how leagues are viewed from this point on. And I think, with the ACC obviously having its top 2 teams fighting to get out, like those stakes are all raised, right? And the Big 12 is this really interesting new coast-to-coast conglomeration. Like, seeing the mascots walk around at Big 12 Media Day was jarring. It's like, wait a minute. The Ute is with the Mountaineer? Like, what are we doing here? Like,
Ralphie, you're back?
Yes.
You barely left, right?
Yes, exactly. So I just think like there's going to be some really interesting decisions that are going to reverberate, outside of just who's in and who's out.
And I trust the committee in this regard. And this is something that happens on social media that makes me roll my eyes and can be frustrating when you start getting blasted for, certain perspectives or judgments that you might make. It's too simplistic to say the SEC schedule is harder. Which SEC schedule? I mean, Bill Connolly did a really good job in his preview of pointing out that within the SEC, there's a pretty wide range of schedule difficulty. Same is true in the Big Ten. One of the reasons that I think Iowa has a decent chance of getting in the mix is because of who they miss. I mean, they miss Michigan, Oregon, and Penn State. They have to play Ohio State. Rutgers is even better than that, a team we're going to talk to in just a minute. They miss Ohio State, Michigan, Oregon, Penn State, and Iowa. They miss everybody. So those types of things you have to evaluate. Let's go through some of these lightning strike teams that could get in contention if the right bolt of lightning hits. And as I look at our 2, and I don't think it's going to be effective on the podcast for me to list 12 teams and then expect our fine listeners to remember all 12. So we'll hit this.
If you're scoring at home, Pete has Arizona 27th.
Exactly. this is a similar list to some degree. But the last team I included, I will readily admit I don't believe in, but I put in because of this. I had Colorado as 36 because simply of this. If you have maybe the best quarterback, certainly one of the best 2 or 3 quarterbacks, and in my judgment, the best all-around football player in Travis Hunter. So you have Shedeur Sanders, you have Travis Hunter. Football's not a two-man game. I get that. You got to have some things on the lines of scrimmage. They had an exodus in the portal. What would have to happen? Because you don't have Colorado anywhere close. I kind of don't believe it. I'm just sort of making the point that with two of the most important things you can have, big-time quarterback, best player, best all-around player, that at least it's a place to start because nobody else in this certainly has anything like that.
Yes, no, I agree. I was talking to some NFL people this week, Rece, and they get like an early scouting list from an outside company. And guess who has the best grade of anybody in all of in that?
Travis Hunter, I would guess, right?
You know, he actually doesn't. Luther Burden does.
Is it who does?
Luther Burden.
Oh, Luther Burden. Okay.
And then Travis Hunter is tied with Ben Morrison of Notre Dame next. So Ben Morrison's obviously the elite corner. Will Johnson obviously thick in that conversation too. So yes,
Will Johnson, highest graded player in the EA Sports College Football 25.
Yeah,
game.
no, well, I mean, look, that is we have solidified Rece Davis's man crush for 24, and it might have been yours for 23 too. This might be, you know, that is true. And by the way, just a resplendently talented player. I don't disagree with your crushing by any stretch. Yeah, Colorado is interesting. Like one thing, and listeners to this podcast will know this. I have a extreme offensive line bias when I look at a team because ultimately, especially in these power leagues now, that's where games are won and lost. Colorado has upgraded the talent on its offensive line. But actually, Kirk Ferentz said this to me, and it's something we said in the podcast the other day when I was BSing with him at Big Ten Media Day. He was like, yeah, you just can't microwave that. Like, you just can't make that happen. So Colorado, Oklahoma, who we're going to talk about in a little bit here, I believe Colorado's line could be good. I don't believe when they go to Nebraska, which has a great defensive line, in week 2, they will be ready. I just don't believe 5 offensive linemen with a coach who's never had his own position unit before can be ready by week 2. Now, prove me wrong, right? They're talented. They got the left tackle who is one of the top recruits in the whole country. Obviously, you know, looks like a Sequoia out there on the flank. They have much better players, and Dion was very clear about that. They needed to upgrade there. It was very obvious. I think Shedeur was the most sacked quarterback, and other than Old Dominion, they gave up the most sacks last year. So I need to see a little bit before I'm ready to say, hey, Colorado is going to go and really trudge through a difficult opening schedule. And don't forget who visits that opening Thursday.
Oh, they've got a South Dakota State, don't they?
North,
is that right?
North.
Oh, North Dakota State. Okay.
Yes, 9-4. North Dakota State is 9-4 in its last 13 FBS games.
They have given. Remember a few years ago, they gave good Kansas State teams fits as well. In this group, also, you've already alluded to Oklahoma. I also have Oklahoma in the group. You had Oklahoma last team in. I had them a few spots higher. That's neither here nor there.
Last team in is 36. If people 36, aren't like,
right. Yes. Yeah, right. Great point. Last team in this group, meaning the lightning strike, everything has to fall perfectly, and you got to get a little luck to get into playoff contention. Oklahoma got a much shorter end of the stick in terms of schedule than its Longhorn brethren as they move to the SEC. Obviously, they play Texas, but they're also at Ole Miss, they're at Missouri, they're at LSU. And between that, in November, late October through November, they have Alabama come calling on the 23rd of November. So they also play Tennessee at home. They have to go to the Haunted Mansion at Auburn. So Oklahoma, very difficult schedule. New quarterback, a lot of starts on the offensive line, which you like, but no returning Oklahoma full-time starters, sort of to your point about microwaving offensive lines. You have guys who've played, but you don't have returning guys who are full-time starters at Oklahoma last year.
And look, Jackson Arnold is supposed to be everything, and we saw some flashes in the bowl game that were okay, but like, the combination of an inexperienced quarterback with a line that's going to have some growing pains inherently. Now, look, Bill Biedenbaugh, if you talk to O-line people, will tell you he's maybe the best in the country, right? So do you have some faith that he can get this group ready through Temple to open, Houston at home? Never underestimate a Willie Fritz team, by the way. And then obviously a very good Tulane team that you don't want to underestimate. There with Ty Thompson at quarterback, Mario Williams, former top receiver recruit in the country, is getting a rebirth uptown at Tulane. So, but you seemingly can navigate that schedule until Tennessee, and then we'll see, right? Tennessee has best edge rusher in the country, perhaps in James Pierce. So like there you go. And they're gonna make you play a million possessions. You're gonna go. So and look, there's a new coordinator there at Oklahoma, obviously with Seth Luttrell, to try to figure out all these new pieces and put it together. So I just think that like the possibility of growing pains at Oklahoma are significant enough where I think that they're, if they end up somewhere in the 50s, I'm not going to be shocked. Now, look, maybe they get hot, go win at the Haunted Mansion, upset Tech. Like there's a path for everybody. I'm a little bit skeptical sitting here now to have conviction, because the ultimate reality, and I think when we're talking about this third tier, this is an important point to bring up, Rece, some big old glitzy brands are going to end up with crooked numbers this season. Like you just can't assume you can putter through in these big leagues and get to 6. And so somebody, is it Auburn? Is it Oklahoma? Is it Kentucky? Somebody's going to, with great expectations or strong expectations, Florida obviously comes to mind, are going to end up with a pretty grisly looking record. Because, as much as we thought on media days, everybody's going to go undefeated, they're not. And teams are going to get cold. Teams are going to get injured. And when you go sideways, the depths are further now as these leagues get tougher.
Another team in this group of 12 that you and I both included from the ACC, Louisville. Louisville only lost one conference game last year, played in the conference championship game. Jeff Brom back for his second year. This is another team in this group that has a veteran quarterback in Tyler Shuck, but he's been just beset by unfortunate injuries. And these aren't little nagging things that have happened to the former Oregon, Texas Tech quarterback. I mean, he, unfortunately for him and sadly for him, he breaks stuff. It's not like he, keeps coming up with an earache and says he can't go. I mean, this guy's been through it, but he's talented. Brom puts his quarterbacks in the best position. They didn't necessarily have great quarterback play last year, but they had tremendous defensive play. So what has Louisville sort of upset the balance of power by making the conference championship game last year? What has to happen for Louisville this year?
So I'm going to nickname this the Aranda principle, Rece. Dave Aranda at Big 12 Media Day basically said, I don't know how you guys pick this stuff because all these teams have 30 or 40 new players. And I was like, yes, Dave, scream it from the mountaintop. So like if we could pick the 5 Aranda principal teams this year where you just have no idea what to expect, I would thrust Louisville into that category, right? Just a lot of new bodies at a lot of new places. Starting at quarterback. If Tyler Shuck can't go, the quarterback has a familiar name. It's Pierce Clarkson, son of Steve Clarkson, who's the long time, like he was Matt Leinert's quarterback guy when Matt Leinart was at USC. Yeah, so he's the guru's kid is sitting waiting in the wings. And then you just have like a lot of new dudes on the offensive line, a lot of new skill now. Now, we should trust Jeff Brom, right? He went out and found the right skill guys last year in the portal, plucked them, put them in positions to succeed. So I'll always give Jeff Brom on offense the benefit of the doubt. But if you really remember last year, Rece, it was Ron English's defense that carried that team. Ashton
Galati led the ACC in sacks last year with 11.
Exactly. And he's obviously back. So you feel like that D line, there's going to be, there's going to be some oomph there. They do have some dudes back in the secondary and are going to be good. But if they can have a reasonable facsimile of that defense, they'll win a bunch of games this year. I just think there's so many new pieces at the tackle position, at the tailback position, at the receiver position, at the quarterback position, where it's just hard to have conviction via the Aranda principle about Louisville in any way.
Is that a trademark thing from you and Dave Aranda, the Aranda principle?
I just made it up, and I'm like 90% sure he was the one who said it at Big 12 Media Day. You're walking around and you hear a bunch of stuff, and it's like, it wasn't like I was writing a story, taking notes, but I think it was Dave who said that. After 3 straight weeks of media days, Rece, a little bit of it runs together. Now it's great, right? You learn a ton, you see people, it's awesome, it's fun, but there's a lot of words are spoken.
One team that I had in for a sleeper long shot that you did not, and I will readily point out the giant problem that they have, is SMU. Now, you did not have them in there in their first year in the ACC. They have some guys back. They have Preston Stone back. They've got Jalen Knighton, Kamar Wheaton, LJ Johnson, kind of a 3-headed running back. But here's the issue: is they move into the ACC, and a lot of people have been sort of sweet on the Mustangs. The one thing I'm going to need to see from them, how are they going to perform week in, week out against the now Power 4 teams? And you say, oh, well, they compete here and there. Here's what they did last year. Last year, they faced 3 Power 4 teams, and they averaged 14 points per game. They scored 11 against Oklahoma, 17 against TCU, and 14 against BC in the bowl game. Their defense.
I was there. It was gross.
Yeah. They're 1-9 in their last 10 games against power conference opponents. Yet, Rhett Lashley has put together a culture of winning. They have some explosion. They've got some veteran guys on the offensive line. They brought in some transfers from the other power conference teams. You don't have SMU in that list, despite coming off an 11-win season. What do you think?
I don't. I bandied them around. Some of it is just pure eyeball bias because I was at the Fenway Bowl, and they kind of got pushed around a little bit by a pretty mediocre Boston College team, right? Like wasn't like a great BC team full of maulers, although I think BC will be fine this year. Now they did have their backup quarterback in that game, Kevin Jennings, who won them the AAC title game the week before. Interestingly, they brought both quarterbacks to media day, Rece. Preston Stone, who I got a chance to talk to and visit with. He was a great kid, and elicited some feelings of like, all right, this guy's got a little bit of stuff to him. And Jennings is a really good sophomore quarterback who would take over seemingly for Stone if he left this year, but I don't think as a junior he's going to go anywhere. So it's hard to keep 2 good quarterbacks. So I thought that was a pretty interesting move by Rhett Lashley. So here was the stat that I took away from spending some time with SMU in Charlotte, is that they brought in 20 portal guys, and Lashley told me 13 of them were O linemen or D linemen. And give Lashley credit for this. He went and spoke with teams that made similar jumps: Gary Patterson, TCU, Kyle Whittingham, Utah, the Big 12 teams that just made the jump last year, and said, hey, what was it like? What do I need? So he went and did his homework. And then he had a really interesting conversation with Neil Brown, who played all 4 teams at West Virginia last year, or saw them all on film at the very least. I don't know their schedule off the top of my head. And Neil was like, they didn't have the second units on the D line. They couldn't rotate the guys in. So Rhett Lashley was very intentional. And he also has a deep pocketbook from billionaire David Miller. So the combination of doing the research and then filling those holes, I thought was an interesting thing. But I'll believe it when I see it. I'll let them go in the microwave on those lines before I get convicted behind it.
We both have another team that's sort of sneaking around a little bit that has some potential. We both have West Virginia out of the Big 12 in our long shot list. Now there are a couple of teams on our list with playmaking quarterbacks. We've got Virginia Tech, who I want to talk about extensively, coming up with Kyron Drillins. Grayson McCall's going to North Carolina State. You've got Connor Wegman healthy at Texas A&M, who we haven't, and then Garrett Green at West Virginia. Now his completion percentage is not what you want. Touchdown interception ratio was good, but he ran for nearly 800 yards and 13 touchdowns last year. They've got a couple of strong running backs. They've got 3 on the offensive line that are returning. They've brought in some guys on defense in terms of trying to generate a little pass rush and help in the secondary some. And, they ran the ball extraordinarily well last year. what has to this league for West Virginia, the Big 12, and it's one of the reasons that I'm not totally convicted about who's going to win the thing. But a team like West Virginia is not really that far off from being able to at least make its way into the conference championship game. And if you do that, then you're much like Rutgers that we've talked about a little bit. Get in that conference championship game, you're one win away, you're one upset away, or one victory away from contention.
You just try to suck up to McAfee.
No, not at all. They are, they're the only team with three 750-yard rushers, all of whom return.
That was my stat. You stole it from me. But I'm going to tell you that if you watch them last year.
How about this one? They also have one of the worst drop percentages. So I mentioned the completion percentage for Garrett Green being a problem. Part of the reason of that is they have over nearly 7.5% drop percentage, which is in the bottom 8 or 9 in the country.
So late last season, as good as C.J. Donaldson was as West Virginia's starting running back, Jaheim White, the backup, really sort of came on late as a bell cow. And I really feel like Neil Brown's a really creative play caller going back to his time at Troy and is a really strong offensive mind. I feel like if you have a running quarterback, there's a built-in advantage. And then if you have two elite tailbacks and a really strong offensive line. Now they lost their center, who I believe got drafted, correct, Rece?
Mm-hmm.
But Wyatt Millham at the left tackle.
Zach Frazier.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. And he was maybe the best center in the country last year because he was a guy who could have gone for $1 million to an SEC team, stuck around. But they have a lot of continuity on the O-line, a ton of continuity in the run game. Like there's just it'll be interesting to see. One of the games I'm most looking forward to week 1 is that Penn State West Virginia game because there's some classic old school themes there. Credit Penn State and the administration. Like I hope they play that game in 10 years. I would probably bet against that they play that game in 10 years, right? Like a local road game. I want them to, man.
I want them to also.
Reece.
Yeah,
I want them to. But look at we can see it. Like we can see the deli slicer of the good non-con games coming, right? Look what UCLA did a couple weeks ago, getting out of Auburn and Georgia. Just like you can feel the deli slicer coming on that. And we are not biased towards any team, but we love good games, man. We want good games. We want people to schedule. Go schedule games. And that will be really interesting. Again, part of that pressure on the committee is, do you hold it against USC if they lose to LSU in the non-con, or do you just look at Michigan making the playoff the last couple of years? I mean, they didn't play anybody the last 2 seasons in the non-con, just like zero. Ohio State is playing nobody in the non-conference this year. It's likely not going to affect them. So if people are incentivized by not playing good non-conference games, it's bad for the sport. Period. End of story. So good for Penn State for playing this game. I am fired up for this game. I will be interested to see if West Virginia can hold at the point of attack and push Penn State around and move the ball and get Morgantown rowdy and kind of keep them in the game. Because Penn State has more talent. I don't think anybody's going to argue that. So I feel like between that and at Pittsburgh, West Virginia has one of the most awesome non-conference schedules of any in the country. And right now you got to think they'll be favored at Pitt. Now, who knows? There's the variables of the first 2 games. Pitt has a totally new OC in Cade Bell. They're going to go tempo. It's going to be a completely different look for Pat Narduzzi. And we will see how ready they are. The one thing that scares me is by the first week in October, they have Penn State at Pitt, Kansas at Oklahoma State, and then we'll even go Iowa State, Kansas State. That is a tough slog, man. That's about as tough of a slog as you can have by the halfway point of the season. Now, Neil Brown was salty at Big 12 Media Day. He thinks they're built for it, but they really got to push through. Man, then they go to Arizona. Jeez, that's a tough schedule.
Yeah, they've got a tough conference schedule, Pete. I'm going to look here because in my chart, I can't believe that I have this correct. I feel like I've missed an @ because so many of those games are at home.
So I have at Pitt, at Oklahoma State. Okay.
Yeah, I knew I missed an @ in there. They're at Oklahoma State. I knew every now and then. Yeah, I've talked a few times on here about this chart that I do in the preseason to get ready. Yeah. And I was looking in the schedule and I was like, there's no way they have all of these games at home. I missed an @ in there. Yeah. But still, a significant number of the games are at home. Kansas, Iowa State, Kansas State, all at home. So, that'll be helpful to them for sure.
Yeah. And if, all of a sudden they're the kind of team too, Rece, that could get hot and be sitting there ranked 8th, on October 1st, right? Like that's not unreasonable if they if they pull a couple upsets. But man, that Kansas game in Morgantown on September 21st, that game could have some juice now.
Big game potentially.
Yeah.
That could be a lot of fun. Some of us are really, really high on Kansas with an enormous caveat. Are you most convicted? You sound very convicted about West Virginia among this group of teams that we've talked about, this 12 extreme long shot teams. Would you consider yourself most convicted that West Virginia has the best chance to find that lightning in the bottle and get into this new 12-team playoff?
I would say of this grouping,
West Virginia and Texas A&M are the two teams I feel like could do it. Because I feel like, look, we can break down rosters and look at portal rankings and everything, but home field advantage is still a massive, massive factor in college football. And the more people I talk to, the more optimistic I am that Texas A&M could have one of the better defensive lines in the whole country. I feel like Shamar Turner comes back off of a second-team All-SEC season. They bring in Nick Scroton, who led the Big Ten in sacks last year, and NFL people really like him as a first-round type talent. And then you have a lot of those recruits who maybe didn't pan out. And I do think the one thing from talking to A&M's players at SEC Media Day, Rece, was that they were pretty blunt that like there just wasn't much discipline there last year. Like Mike Elko has brought it. Like if you can bring in all the great recruits you want, but if you run a disorganized program that's undisciplined, you aren't going to maximize the talent. And I have a lot of faith in Mike Elko maximizing the talent there. So we will, because what did they had 2 defensive players drafted at Duke last year, maybe 1, just the defensive lineman.
I'd have to.
Yeah,
let me look at my Duke list and see.
And they were like,
sure. And Duke also lost a couple of guys that were transferred to quote unquote greener pastures, but on defense as well. Yeah,
but like Mike Elko did a lot with a little last year, and he's got more, at A&M just in terms of raw defensive talent. So I'm excited, right? You can, it's not quite August, so we can make a case for anybody still.
Well, A&M is one of the interesting ones. I like them too. And the other thing that's remarkable about this, and while, that's kind of part and parcel of the new coach. They talk about how the old system wasn't as good. Now we've got a new energy and the energy vampires are gone and all of that kind of stuff. But it is pretty remarkable. Yeah, new strength coach. We were never worked out harder than we have right now. But look at the guys. You're saying that they have the potential with Shamar Turner, Shamar Stewart to have.
Yeah, it was a top 10 recruit.
Yeah, to have the best defensive line in the country. Look at who they lost to the portal. Walter Nolan is going to be a staple of the Ole Miss defense up front. LT Overton's probably going to play a big role at Alabama. Fidel Diggs is at Syracuse. Maybe you throw a rock at Jimbo and he'll have, rock-proof windows to be able to take care of it with $76 million or whatever it is. But you at least have to thank him for some of the talent that he left behind. They have dudes.
Yeah. And I'll say this about Walter Nolan and maybe a little bit of Evan Stewart too. Like they just didn't live up to their rankings, right? Like Walter Nolan was a good player there, but and he is a great prospect. I want to see that guy dominate rep in and rep out. I have not seen that yet. Now, maybe others have. And look, the talent and the physical gifts are undeniable, but it's go time, man. Like if you want to go to the NFL and you want to be that high of a pick, you better show us more. And Evan Stewart changed scenery going up to Oregon. Obviously, Dylan Gabriel is going to pass the ball. They have a very good O-line. Like he should have plenty of opportunity, but production needs to meet potential with both of those guys, Rece, for me.
How about NC State? Let's go 2 for here as we kind of wind down through this long shot group. In the ACC, there are a couple of teams that I think have a chance to get in the mix. It's North Carolina State and Virginia Tech. There are a lot of similarities there. They played a close game when they faced each other last year. NC State gets Grayson McCall at quarterback. Virginia Tech finished the year strong under Brent Pry. I like both of these teams in the mix. And in fact, I have Virginia Tech was the team that almost made my tier that we'll do in the next podcast, the tier above. I'm pretty high on the Hokies to take a step forward this year.
Yeah, it was interesting to me
talking to NFL teams how they have a couple high-end prospects now on defense and in the secondary that maybe they haven't had in the past, Rece, right? Like I can't tell you the last time there was like a thumper Virginia Tech prospect on that defensive side of the ball. I can't remember one in the last 5 years or so. And look, there's been a talent drain. There's no other way to say it. And all of a sudden you've got a couple of dudes who are now projected in the second round, and a couple of guys who are just kind of in a better place. When you look back at the entire secondary coming back, you look at Dorian Strong at corner, you look at Mansour Delane, the receiver Jalen Lane, the receiver Allie Jennings, who came over from Old Dominion, and was hurt a lot of last year. He
got hurt in the second game.
Yeah,
and
correct.
He was one of the leading receivers in the country the year before.
And they had a hard time finding themselves a little bit when they lost him. So all of a sudden, like, you now kind of have some of that higher end talent that you need. I'm not saying they're going to win the ACC or anything like that, but they've just like they have grown up a little bit talent wise, which is going to really be and Delane especially the NFL likes. So I really feel like when you start to think about Virginia Tech, you're like, oh, okay, like they've got some real dudes now.
I think that with Drones, over 120 starts returning on the offensive line. Tootin led the ACC. Bashul Tootin, the running back, led the ACC in forced missed tackles. He broke 16% of the tackles he faced. You look at their schedule. That really interesting game. Two teams in our list here: Virginia Tech and Rutgers. I said Vanderbilt because that's Virginia Tech's first game. Virginia Tech and Rutgers play on September 21st. Then after that, Virginia Tech goes to Miami. So you'll have a really late September measuring stick to see if the Hokies are going to get into it. They have Clemson coming to them. They miss Florida State. They miss North Carolina State. They miss Louisville. So there are some things that go their way too. Speaking of Duke transfers under Mike Elko, Aeneas Peebles, who had 5 sacks last year, was the MVP of the spring game for the Hokies. He's now up front for them. So they brought in a couple of other guys too. Brought in a guy from Oklahoma, a guy from Alabama to help on the defensive front. So I'm pretty high on them, and a team that I'm going to see in person early in the season too, when they play Tennessee, is North Carolina State. North Carolina State looking for that elusive 10-win season. They haven't won a conference championship since 1979. They brought in some guys too. They brought in not only Grayson McCall, who we've mentioned a lot. They brought in Jordan Waters, versatile running back from Duke. They brought in a center from Notre Dame, Zeke Correll. They brought in Jahad Carter, who's been productive in the secondary for Syracuse. They've got a Kevin Concepcion, who might be one of the most productive wide receivers that people didn't notice as much last year. Had 10 touchdown catches among his 71 grabs. Now, if McCall can stay healthy, and if he blends quickly with this Robert and Nye offense, I think North Carolina State is another team. They've got a little bit of a tough putt in September by going, having the Tennessee game that I mentioned, then going to Clemson a couple of weeks later. They're at Georgia Tech on a Thursday night late, which smells like one of those games where your season can get sideways. But look, they won 5 straight to end the regular season last year. They sort of found themselves late. They obviously lose Peyton Wilson, who was, as good a linebacker as there was in the country last year. But I believe they can be. I believe they can be a force again. They can be in this group that if things fall right, you upset Tennessee, maybe you knock off Clemson, or at least find some way to split those 2 games. Then you've got a little momentum heading into the rest of the season.
Yeah, they to
To me, Rece, are the consummate, like, could be a contender still. Say they lose to Tennessee and Clemson, and then win the rest of their games and are in the contention for the ACC title game, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
they are going to play like at Cal, Stanford at home, Duke, that at Georgia Tech game you mentioned. Those games would have playoff stakes. So I think that's kind of like one of the cool things about this season is that we're going to be locked in Thursday night, being like, hey, is NC State going to be able to hang around in this conversation or not? As they go. And then obviously they close at North Carolina, who neither of us are particularly bullish on this year, right?
No.
They're in the left out of the 36 category. So prove us wrong, Mac. I know you're listening. And yeah, I just feel like if you look at NC State the past few years, like Tony Gibson deserves the benefit of the doubt on defense. And they lost a lot of guys, and there are a lot of new faces and transfers, but I'm not going to sit here and tell you I don't have faith in Tony Gibson to figure it out on that side of the ball.
We probably should start thinking about wrapping this up with a little rapid fire. I'm comparing our list right now. Give me a rapid fire. Now, I did this a little differently. I sort of looked at the last, when I did my prediction for the 12-team playoffs, the group of 5 team. I listed several teams there in contention. You have a couple of those in my list that you have in this next tier of having the long shot thing. Let's start with Liberty with the undefeated regular season. Give me a real quick couple of sentences. Caden Salter, quarterback, obviously a big star coming back. Why do you have Liberty in this list?
Well, Ian McCaw, the AD, is the MVP of Liberty because they don't play anybody. Now, some of that is they would probably want to play some people, and they just no one would want to play Liberty. But they're Bowling Green, New Mexico State, at Buffalo, at FIU. They just don't play anyone. So it's hard to imagine Liberty losing, which is the ultimate compliment to Jamie Chadwell, right? Like they've been able to retain some good players, including Caden Salter, and I just have a hard time seeing an L pop up on their schedule.
Well, you know what? All due respect to Liberty, and this is the one thing that I should have been a little stronger on a selection day last year. SMU should have gotten that.
Yeah, I agree completely. They got shafted completely. Yeah, that was one of the worst decisions the committee made the first decade, in my opinion.
Yeah, I wasn't a fan of that as well. The other team that I don't have in, also give me a quick sense on. You've got Appalachian State as your next to last team in this long shot group.
Yeah, so I just kind of wanted to make sure I sprinkled in some of these, potential conference winners from that there. And look, the Sun Belt is sort of a beautiful muddled mess, right? Like it's hard to have a ton of conviction. Other than I know the Sun Belt is going to be good, they're still going to get a few skins early in the season, and the way they finished last year, Rece, gives me some hope for our good friends in Boone. Joey Aguilar ended up one of the best quarterbacks statistically in the whole country last year. They're going to run it back with him. They've got some receivers back. And I just think like the sort of tough old ethos at App came back last year when they what did they win 5 or 6 down the stretch, 6 or 7 down the stretch, other than that loss at Troy. So in the in the league title game. So I feel like Troy lost too much to have a ton of conviction on them. So I'm gonna go with App keeping some momentum and slinging it around with Aguilar.
Watch out for Texas State there. I have them listed as my potential group of 5 team. G.J. Kenny, they got
Let's go.
The James Madison quarterback, Jordan McLeod running the show there. So is there anyone on here that, as you looked at my list, as we bring this group of 12, the long shot teams to get into playoff contention, anyone on this list that you looked at mine and said, I can't believe he included them, or I can't believe he left them out?
Well, you included Auburn to keep peace at home, so I'm not going to criticize you for that. Like we all understand the value of peace at home, Rece.
Because we like to let you peek behind the curtain a little bit. I will confess that once I got past, say, 30, I started saying, I don't really believe in any of these teams, but there are some name brands that we would like to at least touch on in the podcast.
Yeah, and that's fair.
Auburn, Washington, who we haven't really talked. That's another one too, because Washington has like no returning production back. So
they have one starter back, I think.
Yeah.
On offense. No, maybe what's our overall? Yeah, it is just a complete Jed Fish at Media called it an unprecedented rebuild, and I completely agree. Like, I can never remember a roster that good being so gutted by the draft and the portal where they're just completely unrecognizable. So I have no conviction on Washington just because I need to see it. Jonah Coleman's a great tailback. Obviously, Will Rogers can sling it, but I am not. It's hard for me to say, okay, they're gonna win 8 games.
Well, here's the thing with Auburn. I think they'll be better. Don't know if their record would be better and they don't have the magic of Jordan Hare for their biggest games. They're at Georgia, they're at Missouri, they're at Kentucky, they're at Alabama. A&M has to go to them. So a really tough schedule there, but I think you could see some improvement. And with a little Hugh Freeze magic, he's back in charge of the offense now. They've changed up some things with the defensive coordinator too, bringing in DJ Durkin, Charles Kelly, who is a long time at Florida. Durkin obviously has been around, former head coach at Maryland, was at Ole Miss with Lane, and he's coming back over. And Charles Kelly, been at Florida State forever, was DC at Colorado last year with Dion, but back to his alma mater. So I think Auburn will show some improvement, but it is probably, full disclosure, to keep the peace at home and also to include a major name brand in the sport to put those two in. So I would say, Pete, I am most convicted about the two teams to get into the mix: Virginia Tech, North Carolina State. Those are the two teams that of this group of long shots that I could see it going their way.
Yeah, I have a hard time having an embrace debate disagreement with you on those teams. And I really think to kind of speak to the greater themes here, Rece, like, that's the magic of this, right? Like, that's going to be the kineticism that makes this season so compelling and so special, is that, Virginia Tech can have like postseason hopes at the highest level for the first time since the end of the Frank Beamer era. That is awesome to have that electricity and to have that available. So I can't wait for that. Hope is a powerful drug, man. And this playoff delivers a lot of doses.
Well, this has been fun. When we do the podcast next, we will go to a group of 12 teams that we feel like maybe just a break or two away. Now, there are a few teams that Pete had in this tier that I feel like are much closer. Among them, Arizona is in that group. Iowa State is in that group for me that has an opportunity. We will talk about those teams and many more, and perhaps a few that might surprise you, the teams that are just a play or two away, a bounce of the ball or two away from getting into this inaugural 12-team playoff. Thanks for listening to the College GameDay Podcast. We encourage you to subscribe. You'll never miss an episode. We'll do the next 12 next time, and you can always download wherever you prefer to get your podcast.